Yeah, so please start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manahat Siaga from DVC Laboratory. I'm a general student. Now I want to discuss my results about aspiration-based learning, exploration and exploitation in conversational learning. So before I begin with my main study, I will introduce a short introduction about my latest background, and I will explain my model. And this is my latest background about individual interests versus collective interests, because each individual has his overall interest, collective interest, tension between individual and collective interest. So maybe we know this comparison problem, like in the real situation of pollution control, press and water supplies, groups, relations. Because in this problem, each individual has incentive to take advantage from others. So my interest is people station about collective interest and individual interest. People station as an outcome, and an outcome effect on individual and other person. But how this outcome can make individual and other person mutual satisfaction? This is my focus. So I'm concerning on people behavior to make decision, individual versus collective interest and outcome. I mean mutual satisfaction. So this is maybe some formalization model that exists until now. Analytical game theory, evolutionary game theory. In case of decisional dilemma, in case of social dilemma, decisional dilemma and other game in operation. So there are some solutions, mutual defection, one should get, only one should get. There is no strict attributable solution in the game. But I focus on learning theory in game, proposed by Honorable and Levin to solve this problem. But there is another problem. What is solution depend on model parameter model? Only one play. Every player have same model and also parameter setting. So the result of the model is depends on our parameters. So how I can construct my learning model? I investigate multi-agent reinforcement learning, stochastic game theory, and also experimental approach by using behavioral game theory. This is intended to learning algorithm convert rationality, and this learning algorithm consider pattern and irrationality. So I would want to combine these two paradigms that exist now, and I create new learning algorithm that involve external factor, knowledge, regulation, and internal factor, technique, motivation, aspiration, and internal model. And also, I want to apply my new learning model by using agent-based modeling. And how we can make verification about my model, I use an experimenter. This is my next future research. And make recommendation. Because I want to make normative and descriptive objective. Normative, we want to use confidence to some optimum solution. But if you want to describe our learning model, we use the pattern. We recognize what is the pattern that arises in human learning process. This is my intention. So this is my research I have already done until now by using heterogeneous agents, by using different model of learning, different parameters. In cooperative game, I build varying learning rate model plus sharing aspiration model. By using combination of this model, I can successfully get optimal result for cooperative game. What I consider now only simulation, but I want to extend my model by mathematical analysis and also real world problem and experimental study to observe the pattern, the rest of the process, and how we can make a normative model to get optimum to make the model converge to optimum solution. And in these two models, I investigate. There are two main important things I consider: problem of balancing exploration and exploitation, and problem of sharing internal value. By using these two considerations, I found to model application on learning organization to use my previous model. This is my background. Maybe balancing between exploration and exploration that arise from Salter, Holland, and Curran. This is previous problem, and until now we dealing with this problem. Exploration, search, variation, risk-taking, experimentation, play, flexibility, discovery, innovation. Exploitation, refinement, choice, production, efficiency, selection, implementation, execution. So how we balance in adaptive system? So we can see system more exploration to exclusion for exploitation. The adaptive system suffer the cost of experimentation without getting many benefit, risk. But more exploitation in adaptive system trapped in suboptimal stable equilibrium. So how we can balance this problem? Need to maintain an appropriate balance between exploration and exploitation. So in this case, I take one model of organizational learning by Marx in 1991. So in behavioral study of organizations are seen as learning by encoding inference from history into routines that guide behavior. This member of organization. This is the routine. Rules, procedures, conventions, strategies, and technologies. And each member have internal model, experience, and they can learn from the routine. And the routine, and each member and the routine can also learn from the member. So the member learn from the routine, and the routine learn from the member. This is the concept of mutual learning. This is the purpose of Marx in 1991. So how he can make the simulation model about the simple one? This is only the simple one. This is the real extra reality, individual beliefs, and organization belief or code, routine. So extra reality, it is in organization we have knowledge. It is represented by external reality, consists of -1 and 1 for m dimension. So each individual have perceived belief about this situation. Consists of -1, 1, and 0. 0 if have not, it had no perception about the external reality. So also organization code F -1, 0, and 1. So socialization, this is mutual learning. Individual can learn from organization code, and the code can learn by selecting individual based on performance. Performance based is like external reality, 5 dimension. It is only 40% because this is true. Perceive the reality. It is true. Perceive the reality, and this wrong, and wrong. So only 40%. This is the performance. So if the individual have more dimension to correctly to perceive the reality, he is selected to improve or to update their organization belief. And also individual belief can learn from this. So there are two parameters. Parameter of socialization and parameter to change the organization belief. This is the closed system. What is the open system? They are turnover. turnover means for each time the member of organization can live in organization and replaced by the newcomer with new belief. And also there are environmental troubles. This is mean this can change by 1, -1 or 1 to -1. So the external reality not fixed. This is we can observe in reality they are changing every time. So this is the open system. So this is some result I consider. Slow learning in part of members can maintain diversity longer. So can make knowledge higher of organization. So proportion of slow learning should be higher in the heterogeneous learning rate. Second, turnover producing variability. A trade-off between learning rate and turnover rate. This is some result of March model. This is some result of March model. And in this result, the model is depends on proportion of the slower learning. How the member can learn from the code. So if the member have slow learning, so he can maintain diversity, and the code must repeat to the scientific member. This is how we can balance the exploration and exploitation in March model. But they not achieve the optimum knowledge, and I intended to make the learning model to get the optimum. So what is we need? I consider the law of requires parity. Only parity can destroy parity by SD. And according to the model, parity is only provided by individual learning from the code based on probability. So I searched for another resources. Then I found experimentation or exploration. There are 3 kinds of experimentation in organizational learning. Unconstrained experimentation, uncontrolled. So every members can do whatever he want to do to experiment. Organizationally constrained experimentation, top-down approach. So the organization determine when we must do experimentation. And the last one is rational self-constrained experimentation. This is some kind of control how members can do experimentation. But how we can control experimentation to generate exploration? So my focus is on this way. This is some kind of bottom-up approach from the member of organization, but we must control this. So my proposed model is aspiration-based learning. Individual and organization improve the knowledge by experimentation and learning that are controlled by dynamic aspiration level. Through the learning process, individuals are lowered in time to share their aspiration level. This is my purpose. So this is the process of organizational learning. Do experimentation based on probability of experimentation, learning by code based on probability of learn by code, and learning from code based on probability of learn from code, and interaction phase. So in the model have 3 phases: experimentation phase, learning phase, and interaction phase. I will explain this. This is experimentation, the process. This is my model. Probability to make experimentation or not to make experimentation. So from this propensity of experimentation, they can get performance. They can get payoff. This is the payoff, and there are aspiration. Stimulus is the difference between individual payoff and aspiration. And this is my purpose model, to cumulate stimulus and then use string of reinforcement function like this. This is my purpose. This function like escape point. So we know escape if probability is low, then the propensity is also low. This is my purpose model by using string of reinforcement function. And this is socialization process, also same, but he used probability learning from code and probability not learning from code. So I use only my model in this process. And the third is learn by the code. But in this case, aspiration determined by aspiration organization minus average aspiration of selected group. Because in the learn by the code, we select who the member who has best performance. So we determine aspiration based on aspiration of organization and average aspiration of selected group, and use same like the previous model. So this is learned by the code. So we can count how we can change. This is the example. So this is the dominant is, this is the reality. The dominant is 1. This is 3. We have 3, 1. So we have dominant belief like this. So the code is changed to 1. This is some example how we can change learn by the code. So this is updating probability. This is only mathematical formulation. So this is interaction process. Randomly interaction with equal probability equal to 0.5, and the equalizer of information depends on the weight. This is how we can count the weight. This is also formulation of mathematical. This is updating aspiration for each individual and for organization. And this is my simulation result. This is closed system. I compare with much model. I use dimension of reality 30. So this is the maximum. This is a 2 line, the yellow and the black line. This is my proposed model, and converts to maximum value of knowledge. But much model with two set of probability, P socialization 0.1 and P learning by code 0.9 and half 0.5 and 0.5. You can see this depends on the parameter. So it is I want intended to show how we made the model of learning that not defined, that not depends on parameter. So I change the parameter P1 and P2 to this formulation. So this is the dynamic. So we change parameter to variable. This is the short explanation. The experimentation of or exploration process by the individual phase to perceive the required variety of knowledge necessary of the organization. So as we can expect, aspiration can converge to the maximum knowledge. This is the maximum of aspiration organization, and this is the average of all individual aspirations. As we also expect, the probability to experimentation, probability to learn from code, and probability learned by the code also goes to 0. Because the code of organization and individual belief is already converged to this value. So they are nothing to experimentation or learn by code or from code. So this is the result awkward system. This is awkward system. There are fluctuations because in each time there are turnover and the turbulence of environment. This is the case, but the model robust to maintain this situation. But the March model is only got half, only 15. 15 from the maximum 13. So proposed model more robust against the upward and turbulence effect. So, but aspiration level, we can see in open system, this is already converged to the optimal value, and the probability of learning or of experimentation is fluctuate because turbulence and turnover effect. But he has already controlled by this aspiration level because aspiration level has already converged to the optimal value. This is my one. So this my conclusion. Balancing process of exploration and exploitation in organizational learning can be achieved by individual experimentation and interaction among individuals to share their aspiration. In the changing environment, the proposed model is more robust than March model. Individual aspiration level is one important thing to balancing exploration and exploitation process in organizational learning. Individual experimentation is not a risk as long as the heterogeneity in individual aspiration can be eliminated. So this means if we in the beginning have a very aspiration level, but if we can make mechanism to make the aspiration level converge to certain value, we can do experimentation without thinking about risk. Okay, thank you very much. So, there are any comments to my model or questions? I propose this model to the next conference. I will submit this paper on October 1st, this month, next month, October 1st. So, tomorrow. Yes. Today afternoon. In Saturday. So this is also make me happy because into this session can also, and also all of you can give me some input to my model. How we can. But this is only the simple model that I use March model and change the parameter to the variable by using my model. This is only the simple model that I can. My goal is to achieve the optimal normative objective of my model, not to observe the pattern, not to make descriptive of process of learning. It's not to attending to this. But I now not consider to make experimental study. But if I has already made the experimental study, I can combine the pattern recognition from my result of experimental and my normative model. So I can change what is the parameter or what is the variable, what is the factor important to improve my model and to make as close as to the reality, but in some range of situation, not for general model.
So we are talking about the reality.
Yes.
Could you show us some sort of examples of organizational learning to which you can apply your model? So what sort of an image should we have in mind?
So after March models, there are several researchers going to investigate the March model and then to make further correlation to the reality. And they observe if our source of diversity only provided by the member, the knowledge cannot be achieved higher. So we must the members we must encourage to do experimentation. But how the member can be encouraged to do experimentation? Because the organization afraid, but because experimentation, there are some risks to do experimentation. So many organizations not to change their strategy, their technology for the existing, because they perceive the current technology or the current strategy is better. So the organization not allow the member to improve or to do experimentation. This is the fact from the reality. But there are another fact that if organization allow the member to do experimentation, they can improve their knowledge of organization. But how to control? Because if every member do experimentation and change the routine every time, maybe the performance of organization can be collapsed. The organization can be collapsed. So how to control? How organization can control the member to do experimentation or exploration? It is the in what I got in my model is how to control the member to do experimentation.
Okay. To that question, what did you get? What sort of say findings did you get from the simulation?
Yes, from the simulation, I get people must have some goal, some aspiration. In my case, some level of aspiration. So if he can achieve the aspiration level, the goal, so the organization must maintain the goal. So people satisfied because their goal is already achieved. But if the goal is not already achieved, below the aspiration level, so the organization level must encourage, must give some reward or some kind of strategies to make their aspiration level improve. So after this point, organization must maintain this aspiration. So as we can see, this is the aspiration level and can converge. So this is stable, but it is case of normative. But from this simulation model, we can get some insight that aspiration of average aspiration of all members in organization equal to organization aspiration level. So make the people satisfied. In this case, the stimulus is zero. So people, but if the organization can want to higher the aspiration level, and that the aspiration level of individual can adjust to the aspiration of organization. But this is I got from this model, because this model is sometimes learning cognitive learning, conscious learning, not unconscious learning. There are two kinds of learning: conscious learning and unconscious learning. So there are stimulus, cognitive. This is I not satisfied with this, or I satisfied with this. So people can recognize this by using the stimulus. So people can improve their capability to look at the real system in this model. Yes.
Can you show the last slide one more time? Yeah, the last point you have there, as long as the heterogeneity in individuals' aspiration can be eliminated. That made me think about what kind of, do you have some kind of, some sort of organization that you feel that this suits best? Is it for any good, is it a good model for all kinds of organizations or some specific kind?
Maybe it is depends on organization and cannot be applied to all organizations because the heterogeneity in each organization can be different among the organization. So how to make heterogeneity in aspiration, individual aspiration converge? We can observe. So this is maybe I want to make experimental study how to measure aspiration of individual in some case. This is my purpose to next because it is in some case we can measure. I believe we can measure the aspiration of individual. But next reason I will consider this. I will consider. So I not want to generate to all case. I want to start with the simple case, with experimental study. Only a simple. So from the simple I move to next. This is my
So my comment between your concept of your mathematical model and experimental research, I recommend you to develop the concept of aspiration-based management. So before applying our mathematical model to the realistic situation, maybe you have to conceptualize your theory as a aspiration-based management concept. So and show your result as a more simple or easy to understand conceptual framework. And so you should show how that kind of approach and is useful for what kind of society or organization. So the conceptualization, so verbal conceptualization of aspiration-based management is useful if it have suitable mathematical background as you have provided.
Thank you very much.
It's time's up, so thank you for the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
The title, maybe some word is missing, I think. Some based title. Yeah, aspiration-based learning. No?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
That is very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Learning by doing.
Okay.
Excellent. So,
Thank you very much.
話すのってそんなにいいことじゃないからです。そちらで英語がすげえ。すごい機材です。しっかり駐車場。
Please start your presentation.
Speak up, please.
My name is Shinichi Satoshi, and I'm a graduate student at Professor Akinoka. I have studied requirements engineering, especially requirements education. So today, in this presentation, I introduce you methods named our which is requirements education methods. methods. That is part one. And I start from introduction. Existing Bora methods do not include the support for facilitating the boring activities. For example, selecting the goals to be imposed, prioritizing and solving the conflict of goals, and conflict of stakeholders involved, choosing and adapting the goal out of the hands of goals as the specification, rising the impacts from climate change, and improving the quality of the environment based on measurement of the quality output. Solve these problems. Aura is short for building and adds three contributions to first contribution value. This is attached to an edge and expresses big contribution to the goal in achievement of the goal. Second, mathematics is attached to a node that is a goal and stands for the beginning and stability of the goal. And caution. These attributes can be attached to node edge and present the reason why and analysts propose the goal such circumstances. Next section. Procedure. The procedure to strengthen our graph is as follows. First, establishing initial goals as needs. Second, reporting and defining goals and extra goals as we understand. Third, carrying out experiments. Graph. Taking conflicts between goals and runs on goal between stakeholders and solving them. And the trust for other goals. From the following slides, that includes the output of our methods classified by using the accounting system as an example. Initial goals can be considered as the needs of the methods and first, and analysts choose them on the root nodes. And in this paper example, 3 initial goals are set. International views, customers having email accounts, and web accounting system. The analyst can compose initial goals according to the competition where the competition is the communication between the parent goal and its goals so that they are going to be achieved as the goal is achieved. And what the competition is concentration between the goals that the beyond goal can be achieved and this goal is achieved. This is an example of the this is exactly defining condition of the sample set. Here, I explain the details of value expressing how many reasons are goal. It can be an integer or -10. The higher the value is, such goal provides information. The negative value goal is the achievement of the goal. The value is low on the edge, then there is no contribution and usually use this edge. This is the result of adding contribution values and analyzing conflicts. red edge like this indicates that conflict between roles. If a situation such as below exists overlap, then others can deal with it outside. The negative contribution value indicates that the situation graph will appear. So, avoiding conflicts by defining it like this, and like this. Here, writing conflicts between goals again. And here, I explain the details of the frequency matrix, which expresses what degree stakeholders request their goal and the goal is achieved. Each of the value takes an integer minus 10 to 10 as variables contribution value. Each stakeholder has not only attached the performance value to his own, but also estimates the performance values from other stakeholders. As a result, the frequency of goal is represented in the form of matrix like this. In this example, customer thinks very positive from his own viewpoint if the goal attached to this frequency matrix will be achieved. In this paper example, frequency matrix is attached to this goal. As a result, conflict between stakeholders in this goal are real. A stakeholder thinks that the email is done manually. On the other hand, other stakeholders think that the email is done automatically. So the intent between stakeholders is different. Preference matrix indicates this misunderstandings where this goes. Preference matrix can defeat like this. Therefore, in this paper example, insert goal was created, and in this goal, automatically is explicitly described. So, conflict in the goal is resolved in this goal. And finally, in this goal graph, three groups of final goals exist. This one, and this one, and this one. In this case, the analysts must select a group of them. To tackle this problem, the authors in this paper recommend to refer to an element of a preference matrix of first row and first line. That is these values emphasized by yellow color. 8 is the most greatest value. So these final goals should be selected. Each final goal, each goal of this final goal is determined as requirement. And we go into the third section. Quality measurement. In our set of the adapted final goals can be considered as a requirement specification. Generally, the quality of the overall requirement specification can be analyzed before it is made. Therefore, some metrics that can estimate the quality of the requirement specification are the process before making the specification is constructed. Our has some metrics based on the graph of alpha to analyze quality specification. IEEE standard 830 refers to quality practice specification. These are the practices. Our surprise metrics correspond to practice. And each of them is defined by a list of values and quality. In terms of a metric relevant to this factor correctness, I wrote a paper, and that paper was accepted in the flagship conferences here in Japan. But these metrics is communicated later, so I abbreviated the details of metrics, details of metrics relevant to this practice. Last section. This paper, Alba is proposed. Alba is a method for requirement specification, which is an extended version of the quality method by attaching frequency and division techniques and a graph. And based on attribute values and goal graph, some metrics based on quality specification proposed. But as I said, this content attribute abbreviated in this presentation. Right. And it works. This paper is written three problems for it works. First, I need to connect to some methods to make the requirement specification machines as out of this paper. To solve this problem by regarding each of final goals as a case, connecting this case modeling and to Agora may be possible. Second, suppose to decide attribute values as out of this paper. To tackle this problem, introducing methods to decide attribute values such as AHP to output is considered. And at last, identifying stakeholders and their involvement in that process was also another statement. Was this problem connecting others with consensus-based methods such as meeting which is proposed by Barry J. Who are the most effective now in software engineering field, network architecture. That's what I was thinking. Need
Okay, then I have two questions. I think you report that paper, right? So how do you evaluate, how do you criticize the paper from your viewpoint? Your comments,
Yes.
let's say.
my paper.
Your paper? This one is your paper? So your comments to this paper, how do you evaluate, criticize this paper?
I think this paper is very valuable. Valuable for economics and station.
In what sense?
Except for Agora, goal-oriented requirements methods, except for Agora, do not cannot analyze preference of the stakeholders for requirements education. For the problem, Agora is defined as matrix because Agora is preference matrix defined, so using this method, the analyst can analyze preference about stakeholders. In that point, I think this method is right.
I think that is a point, because Agora is more sophisticated than existing Gora.
Yes.
Yes, more sophisticated, I mean. But also it uses more information like attribute value, right? So it's a sort of trade-off between the increase of the necessary information and produced, say, advantage compared with the Gora, right? So how do you, let's say, balance between the cost and advantage between Gora and Agora? Do you see what I mean?
Okay. Maybe I understand. Two attributions defined in Agora. Usable for any other Gora methods.
Could you say in Japanese? Could you say in Japanese?
要するにアゴラとゴーラ比べると、そのアゴラの方がも洗練されてるわけで、ということは逆に言えばその、アトリビュートバリューとかいろんな他の情報を使って付加的な情報を使ってるわけですね。だから当然その得られる結果がリッチになるわけで、だからそのバランスです。どのぐらいたくさんの情報を使ってどのぐらいこう、従来よりも良くなったかっていう、たくさん使ったのにほとんど上がってないとかさ、逆にちょっとしか使ってないのにたくさん上がったとかでしょ。でその辺のそのゴーラーと比べたアゴラのそのパフォーマンスの良さっていうのね。
オール仕事の分析に関しては、特に欧州何百何千件と適用された例があって、それに関しては効果なんですけども、ここでアゴラはあまり企業版のソフトウェア開発に使われた例がない。
まだ新しいんでしょこれ。違う。
これはこの論文自体は2002年で、この後属性だけではないんですけど、いろんなことができるように対応されてきています。で、最も大きな点、アゴラが既存のゴールオリエンティブな話ですことがアゴラができる一番大きな点というのが、今回省略したんですけども、要求使用書作成前のこのゴール使用分析を使った要求獲得段階によって要求使用書の品質特性と呼ばれる、こういった特性というのを考慮に入れた要求獲得が行われています。でこれはアゴラのゴールグラフの構造と、方言度および満足度行列という2つの特性値をフルに活用して、もちろん定量的に定義されている、ちょっといろいろ一つ一つにしてざっくり画面でおいて紹介しました。で、定義されてます。で、それは他のゴール思考で記録できないので、で、ご存知の通り、ソフトウェア開発において、要求分析において、正確な要求獲得ができなかったというソフトウェアのプロジェクトの失敗というのは大きな。その一番大きなところに、要求使用書の、この要求獲得の次に、作られた要求使用書というものが品質が悪いということがありますので、あらかじめで、要求使用書の品質が悪かったら、顧客のニーズが要求使用書の品質が悪かったら、もう一度要求獲得をやりますと。そうすると、人手のコストとか、時間的なコストとか、もちろんお金の関数コストというのも変わりながらなので、そういうのを、その作成される要求使用書の品質というものを、このゴールグラフ上であらかじめ見積もって、そういうゴールの、品質の高い要求というのをあらかじめそれを支援するというのが、このアゴラが、ゴールをできない最も大きい意見。
そんな素晴らしいにもかかわらず、2002年からあんまりこう普及してないって言ってたのはどうですか。
この著者の人は、隣の西橋飯村の計算工学専門佐伯教授が開発したものなんですけれども、非常に、率直に言うと非常に学術界では影響力がある人です。しかしあまり企業の方
人というよりそのアゴラ自身の特徴ではない。人の特徴なんです。著者の。
ケースをくぐってないだけでしょ。ケースを実際にくぐってないんじゃない。ケースをくぐる。だから実際のケース。僕らが実際いくつもそういう上位の設計やってるからさ。でそれでアウトになったケースもよく知ってるんだけど。そういう実際のハードなケースをくぐった事例がね、存在するかって話。
僕の研究室に助教の人と話をしたらば、そういうケースはまだないということをおっしゃっていたので、それは去年の話ですけど、ですから、この開発されてから10年余り、著 手法自体は改良されてますけど、まあ、実際にケースに適用されてるのは間違いない。
それはやっぱり使われてなんぼなんじゃないこれは。
使われてなんですね。
そうね。
でそれは、問題じゃない。
問題。それは情報処理系の人たちの開発の持ってる常に問題。
じゃあ最後にこれをベースにして例えば自分との関連性っていうのはどこかあるんですか。
はい、まあ、途中にも言いましたけど、私は詳しく言ってない、省略して述べてないですけど、この妥当性っていうふうに、この妥当性に関してそのアゴラだと、3つの評価指標、定量的な評価指標が提案されているんですけれども、そのうち、私は、すみません。これがそのうちの一つで、顧客のニーズに関する妥当性、顧客のニーズを、ゴールグラフから定量的に見積もろうという指標なんですけれども、ここで見ていただければ分かるとおり、すべての最終ゴールに対して定義されているんですね。で、私が関心があるのはゴール戦略です。で、ここで私が関心があるのが、こういうある2つのある上位ゴールからゴールから2回速発ゴールにつながっていく。どっちのゴールを選択しますか。先ほど先生いろいろバランスの問題としてまして、これに関連するわけです。高精度だけ見たら面白いわけですね。これが達成されるところで非常に高いですだけれども、顧客のニーズ、これを選択することは顧客のニーズを満たすかどうかというのは貢献度という指標からは何も聞いてない。なぜならば貢献度というのはこのゴールの内容とこのゴールの内容だけを見て、その間にハイゴールが達成されたときに上位ゴールが達成されたらどれだけ貢献しますかという、そこに顧客のニーズとして入ってない。しかし実際に最終的にその貢献度だけで見て選択していたゴールというのが顧客のニーズを満たしていない場合、先ほどおっしゃった結局手元で発生する可能性がある。こんなの作ってくれて売ってない。その要求、得られた要求に基づいて開発された得することでは顧客のニーズを満たしてないわけですから、先ほどのコレクトネスの部分に満たし要求使用者のニーズを満たしてないわけで、結局、要求使用者の段階でまだ見つかればいいんですけれども、最終的に開発する
でも使われてなんぼってことで評価するならば、そのアゴラをさらに宣伝する方向っていうのはどうなんですかね、妥当なんですかね、余計に使われないんじゃないの、めんどくさいな、ここは。
ちょっとコメントしていいですか。その設計、今、木島先生が言った問題に関してね、僕も設計を現役でやってるから少し感じるんだけど、それは評価のツールなんだけどね、設計のツールに見えないんですよ。現場で使用を実際に顧客とすり合わせをしながら書いていくときに、設計者が知るべきそのドメインノレッジをね、構造化していって、それで実際に仕様からその資源を合わせて、ザクマス級的な意味でブレイクダウンしていってね、実際の仕様に持っていくときの、使用技術言語を何とかにもよるんだけれども、そういう種類の設計の話というよりは、こけたときにね、ちょっと2人で話したんですけどね、こけたときに分析するね、ツールには見えるんだ、これが。
そうですね、こけた時の
に分析するためにはとても役に立ちそうなんだけども、こうだったよって事後的にね、ただ事前に現場で顧客とやりながら顧客の持ってるものをある言語に、それは設計言語っていうインプリメントの言語じゃなくて、ある形で設計言語に落とし込んでいくためのドメインノレッジと抽象化の間をファシリテートするような構造のサポートにはちょっと見えない。でそこのところが実際に今の日本の情報屋見てるとファシリテートできなくて、 すでに存在しているフレームの中に強引にゴジゴジと入れてはこけるってことを繰り返しているのを現場で何回も見てるですから、その辺ちょっと辛いなっていう印象がありますね。
時間ですね。
So the next presenter is Santi-san. So please start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to say thank you to Santi and Kevin as our guests and our system family. So welcome to System Academy campus. So I think it's quite far from Okayama. And this is maybe this not is the last presentation because one from PPG lab from the bachelor degree will give the last presentation. So actually, this is our paper that have already submitted to the Journal of the Service Systems, System Science and System Engineering. And the title of the paper is "The Whole is Value Created by Customers to Customers Interaction in Service Systems Using Agent-Based Simulation Approach." And as the co-author is my professor is Ika Sensei. Okay, this is the outline of this presentation today. So in this first part, I would like to talk about the introduction. So in this introduction, I talk about the research background, motivation, and research objective. And then I would like to take some reality case in the airline service selection problem. And then to tackling the problem, I try to propose some methodology, and we try to make some simulation of the value co-created by customers using the simulation approach. And the final part is conclusion and discussion. So this is the first part. Okay, the research background is based on the service domain logic by Professor Steve Fargo, because the service nowadays is very important to quite many fields. And then I see that the service based on the service domain logic from good domain logic is transforming from the good and manufacturing to the service, and see the service as the value of the co-creation. And then the role of the customers also is changed. So that's why in the service domain logic, they see the value is always co-created. And also the customer is very active here. So now the role of the customers change, not from isolated, but it's connected. So based on the research background, I have a research motivation. So based on the research standpoint of view, most study in the value co-creation process have concentrated on the interaction between the customers and provider. So I give you some example. For example, here this is the gap model of the service quality from Paraswarman model. So from this model, they have some 5 gaps here. So there are 5 gaps, but the important gap is the customer's gap. So they see the value here is very clear and given by outside. But in our research, so in contrast, this research clarify what different influences are produced on the value co-creation process by the different ways of interaction. It means that there are some customers-to-customer interaction. So we call it some, like this is a customers-to-customers interaction. So I define that the customers-to-customers interaction like this. So as on the reference, that we define the customers to customers interaction as direct or indirect. So we categorize face-to-face or technology mediated, like using the social media based through the internet. So for example, you browse a message in online brand or beauty site, or if you choose some airline travel, you share about our travel with other passengers. So all constitute about the customers to customers interaction. Okay. So this research will use the process model of the value co-creation of service system. So this model is constructed by Kijima Sensei. And in this model, there are two stages. The first part is the co-experience and co-definition, and then the second part is co-elevation and co-development. In the service process, at the first time, customers and provider try to co-experience, and they co-define by using the shared internal model between customers and providers. So in this research, we just discuss about the first part only, that is co-experience and co-definition. Why? Because this is the most crucial feature in this service system. So the co-experience, co-creation of the experience among the customers and provider is very important. So I have some research objective here. So by focusing on the mutual interaction among the customers, we try to explore how different effects emerge on the process of the value co-creation based on the communication side that I mentioned before. There is the social media based or SMS, or we call it some random interaction, and also face-to-face. And to answer this objective, we try to adopt agent-based social simulation approach as a basic tool to deal with the interaction. So this is my research question. So in order to investigate the whole communication style among the customers influence the learning process, we pose some two research questions. The first one is, under what communication style that the customers are able to learn about the provider's features efficiently? And then the second one is that under the communication style of the customers are able to achieve the highest performance. And to make some more reality, we try to take some example of the airline service selection problem. And during my stay in Indonesia, I tried to do some qualitative research by doing some interview with the vice president of the Indonesian airline. Because in the airline service, when the customers are interested in traveling, they need to choose which one the appropriate airline will be chosen. So some of customers can choose the social media based using the SNS through the internet, face-to-face, or isolated. So maybe my research here is very simple. So if you choose the airline and then you don't have any knowledge, so you will interact with each other, right? So you will communicate with other customers. If you have a little knowledge, maybe it's better if you use the social media based, such as the Facebook or maybe Flickr or maybe Mixi or something. But if you have some family or relative and they are familiar about the airline itself, so it's very efficient to ask directly by using face-to-face. So based on the simulation result, based on the equation, I would like to try to answer that question. And then by showing the graphic from the simulation result, we try to answer that question. So for example, if we use some social media in business, in airline, you can choose maybe use the Facebook, or maybe you can use the Flickr, or maybe Twitter or YouTube. So, and this one is the one of the biggest airline in Indonesia, Indonesia also using the Facebook. So because in Indonesia, Facebook is very familiar. So everyone connected with using the Facebook. So maybe the second ranking in the world that Indonesia is Facebook. And then using the face-to-face. So I try to make some comment from the efficient communication So this is from Spencer Janet. She said that human face or to-face interaction is the most effective form of the communication. It's very simple and it's meeting to deliver the rich and potent experience. So I think this also is very important to make some interaction with other customers in the service system. So based on the type of the communication style, we try to categorize type of the communities in this region based on the communication style. So if we call some isolated community, so if you just interact without communication with other customer, we call it isolated community. And the second one, so just only communicate with the family or relatives or friends, we call it face-to-face community. And also we categorize the type of the face-to-face. The first one is at least that in our family or relatives understand about the providers well. For example, maybe in the family there are a lot of our family knows about the airline, a good airline. Or in the second type is a face-to-face too, we call it. There is no family who understand about the provider's preference correctly. And what is the difference between the SNS community? So the SNS community, it's all the customers communicate each other randomly by using the SNS because we don't know each other in using the SNS. So maybe we try to search from the comment or feedback from other customers. So that's why we call it some random interaction or SNS community. So this is we assume that the provider here is a high-oriented provider. Actually, we have two different types of the oriented provider. The first one is high-oriented provider. We call it full service. And the second one is the low-oriented provider. We call it CityLink. So this is based on the interview last time during my stay in Indonesia. And I conduct some interview like this and then give some questionnaire to the vice president of the strategic marketing of airline company. And then this is the result. So how to validate the number of this one? Maybe this is very controversial, so I need to validate using the value, using the interview like this, and then because this is very subjective. And I categorize the customers based on the expectation level. There is low expectation, and also high expectation. So the provider also based on the interview, low service, and also the high service. So customer expectation, I refer to some reference from the Parasurahman. So they categorize they categorize based on the level of expectation. There is low expectation, middle, and high expectation. And then how to tackle the problem of the airline service. So I try to propose some methodology here. The first one is I use the hypergame. Why? Because as I mentioned before, the customer has a different value. So how we construct the value from each customer. So the customer can have some internal model, different internal model. And then by using the hypergame, we can make some internal model or subjective game. So hypergame can be represented to the internal model of the customers. And then the second one is I use the genetic algorithm here. How the customer change their value during the interaction. So by learning to improve their knowledge, we try to propose some using the genetic algorithm method through the interaction. And then I try to propose some agent-based simulation. So because the agent-based simulation is related with the interaction among the customers, and there are some behavior from the customers, and also the customer has an output. So this is the methodology that I use in our research. And then why simulation approach? Because we combine some agent-based simulation approach with the heterogeneous analysis and adaptive learning model, and how customers interact to learn by obtaining information about the provider, we try to propose some adaptive learning. So adaptive learning has a learning posture using the genetic algorithm method. So this is the hypergame situation in the service systems. We assume there is a lot of the customers. So we generate randomly of the customers here. And then the customers have our internal model, and also provider have our internal model. In the service process, so they try to co-experience and then try to co-define the common understanding about the service. So after the interaction, we propose some learning method or learning procedure, they co-define about the reputation of the provider. It means that at the beginning, the value of the customers is different. But after the interaction, the customer's internal model can be the same. In this research, the customer's internal model said about the reputation of the provider. So the way we generate the internal model is depend on the communication side. So for example, if the SNS we generate randomly, and also for the face-to-face we also generate randomly, but the distance of the internal model is quite same. So it's not so far, because we assume that in the face-to-face community, because in the family we just only have some not so large population, so we assume that it's very small community. And this is my model, so this is the adaptive learning model of the hypergame in the server system. So we have some three types of the community here: isolated community, face-to-face community, and SNS community. And then during the interaction with the provider, so after the iteration, after they play the game with the provider, and then they can change their internal model to the internal model using learning procedures here. So we support the customer's interaction here using the learning procedure. So we build the learning procedure to support the customers over here. And how customers are improve their knowledge through the interaction, and also it formulates how customers and revise the current internal model. In the learning procedure, there are three stages. The first one is the initialization. So because we must generate randomly our internal model the first time, it's depend on the communication side. And the second stage is the action choice. So we will use the two kind of decision rules here. We use the subjective class equilibrium and also random action. If in the game there is no subjective class equilibrium. And then how to update. So they have the current internal model, and then after update by using the genetic algorithm, there is some fitness function and also the selection, crossover method, and then they change the current internal model to the new internal model. So this is the learning procedure by using the GA. Maybe technically I didn't show in the slide because it's very technically. But the point here, there's the procedures here. The first one is the initialization, how the customer's internal model can be generated randomly, and then because we talk about the genetic algorithm, we must encode the chromosome of the internal model, and then action choice, fitness evaluation, selection, and then crossover by mapping the internal model, and then they got some new internal model, and then change to the next iteration, and then change the internal model, and then after the iteration will be reached, or maybe they got some new internal model. So in the fourth part, I talk about the simulation and the implication. So we try to design some scenario here. The first one, how to answer the research question. We have two research questions. So one research question, we try to measure the efficiency by the distance between the average of internal model of the customers and provider. And then the second one is we measure the performance by the average payoff obtained from mass equilibrium by the game provider. And then parameters for the simulations here, so number of customers in isolated community, we generate 1,000. For the face-to-face, because we assume it's a small community, which is only 50 customers. So for the number of the customers is in SNS is 1,000, maximum generation number is 100, trans number also 100, and crossover is 0.7, and the threshold here is 4. So the first one is learning efficiency. We try to compare the learning efficiency customers in 4 types of the community. Which one is the good one? How? Measure by the whole class the distance between the average of internal models of the customers and providers approach to 0. So we can see from the first simulation here, we said that in the face-to-face one, just only one customer who knows very well about the provider. As you can see that the SNS is a good one. So if only one customer who knows provider well, then SNS provides customers to the provider. For example, it means that if in our family just only one family member who knows provider well, so it's better for us to search by it. And then for the second simulation, I tried to conduct some simulation if we said that 20% of the customers know very well about the provider. And the result is a face-to-face provide customers to learn about the provider very well, efficiently here. And then for the 50% customers also can approach to 0. So it means that more customers who knows about the provider very well, it means that it's very good. So in face-to-face community, where or not there is a customer who completely understands about the provider is very crucial. And then how to answer the second research question. So we try to describe the learning performance. We compare payoff of the customer of the 4 types by using the average payoff obtained from the Nasdaq group. So the first one, if we can see here, we set 20% of the customers who know very well. So the face-to-face is a good one, the same result at this distance. And then if 50%, and then face-to-face also is a good one, it means that if more friends of yours know about the provider very well, since the variety of the provider is not high, and you can learn very efficiently using the face-to-face. And then if just only one customers who know about the provider, then random interaction is a good way to get the valuable information if the few relatives and friends know about the provider. So the conclusion and discussion for the research, we had already validated the mutual communication among the customers, and by doing the simulation, that isolation is always show the worst one. It means that the customers to customers interaction is very important to get information about the provider. And face-to-face is very efficient if more friends or relatives are very familiar with the provider. But SNS is a good way to learn about the provider if the provider is a newcomer and we have some little knowledge about the provider. And discussion, so we try to validate our claim by codifying an internal model by sharing experience and familiarizing themselves with the reputation of the provider. And then we try to quantify learning efficiency and also learning performance. And this is my future research. We try to validate these claims by using the actual data. So this one is just only from the provider side. We try to conduct another simulation with the real data from the customers and also from Indonesian airline company. And then how to make the mutual understanding between the customers and provider, because this is just only from the customer side. So this is my future research. Thank you for your attention. If there is a question and discussion or comment, it would help for my dissertation. Thank you very much.
Actually, I like your presentation very much. It's really nice. And it's quite interesting. Have you considered about those traveling agencies? Traveling agencies. like traveling agencies, they do not they sell the air tickets to the customers, but they are not the providers. They are like some agencies between the customer and the provider, but the interaction between the customer and the travel agencies actually is quite frequent in real life. So I will consider this type of agent.
In my research, maybe this very general, so I try to maybe to more detail about the agency itself. But because we assume that here is provided just on the airline service company. So maybe in the airline service company there's a lot of representative people who are responsible about this. And we talk about the provider, which is that's why my research just only I conduct some interview to the representative people in the airline who are responsible about the how to get some internal order from the provider side. So maybe agency, so there's a lot of detail that customers can choose which one is the good one, especially maybe to find some cheap ticket or something. So we did not consider about that one in my research. So maybe further.
You said that face-to-face communication, you said that the family or your friends, if they know about provider very well, it's really good. But I just thought that probably the people who know about provider very well, they may be using SMS. Have you ever thought of that? They have a lot of tools to get information. Probably SMS will be one of the really strong tools to get information.
So that's why in the customers to customers interaction we categorize it into two types.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this two types is good. It depends that you can choose the face to face or maybe SMS. But if maybe it's very efficient if you use the face to face in case in your family is maybe you use the airline like maybe for my case maybe I use just on Garuda because I believe that Garuda is a good one. So I believe my family exactly, and then it's very effective. But maybe if you don't know about the maybe it's depend on our budget also. So for example, for me, maybe for student, I want to go back to Indonesia maybe. So I search from the airline and then I compare which airline is a good price or not. So SNS is a good one. I mean, but maybe the service itself, we cannot guarantee that the service is good or not. So yeah. So it depends on maybe the price or budget that we have. So, but in this reason, we really consider about it. Yeah.
Another thing that about co-definition between provider and customers, that was really interesting. I just thought that that's true. That provider always try to know what provider thinking, what customer thinking, and what customer want. But innovation is always next.
The next
So about this interesting that it's always provider try to create the next step.
Yes.
I mean, what provider, what customer needs. So if you consider of that, that would be great.
Yeah. This is just only for the short time, but maybe for the Olympic education and for education is so long. Thank you. Another question or comment? So I hope this paper will be accepted my first because
May I ask a
yes,
question?
Sensei.
Yeah, there are three types of computers, how to say, communication style.
Communities, yes.
Yeah. The three types of communication style, through SNS, the face-to-face, and the isolated. How the isolated customer can get the information?
It's So in the learning procedure, we just accommodate. I mean, just support the customer who interact with each other. So that's why in the graphics, the isolation customers is always stable because they just directly with provider directly here. So
For example, the airline website or something like that.
so this one is so there is no interaction with other customers. So always stable here. So this is the worst one. And this one is the isolated customers because they didn't interact with other customers, and then they didn't revise the internal model or their value. So that's why the value is always stable like this.
Are there no information source other than customers who are isolated?
We assume that there is no communication, so there is no.
Even with provider?
Yeah, maybe we just only providers, so that they just believe with the provider, just directly interact with provider. Is that it or?
Okay, it's okay. It's okay from us.
Okay, I think first.
Okay, thanks. I know some companies who don't have a website of their own, but they have a Facebook page. Have you taken companies like that into account? So their website is their Facebook page.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's like
Not many probably in the aviation industry, but
it's like your company about
I'm not
show
sure.
like last time the passport. This is the president.
It doesn't happen with that company. But I know some smaller companies, especially startups.
Is it in Finland?
Yeah, it happens not only in Finland.
But I think that's sometimes more efficient than having the website.
Yeah.
You know, SMS,
Yeah.
people can
Yeah.
interact.
Yeah.
So SMS here is SMS here is using the Facebook or Flickr or Twitter or YouTube, so you can use it's a whole like SMS with social media based.
Okay. So from your research, we are now quite sure like face-to-face interaction is better, right? I mean,
Not better.
I mean the
So
good
it's
way.
Face-to-face or face-to-face or SMS, you can.
Okay. So from the organization viewpoint, do you think is there any influence of organization to encourage the customers to make this kind of face-to-face interaction, or is there any encouragement from the organization or any initiatives that organization take to create this kind of interaction level or
Face-to-face.
yes?
So I showed the slide about from the efficient communication, and then Spencer said that human face-to-face interaction also is very important. And then because just not only using the technology, but also using the face-to-face, I think it's quite simple, and also we can share the emotional experience from the customers there. So I think it's good communication.
Because for me, like if the organization takes some initiatives or some encouragement program for the customers to make much more face-to-face interaction, in that case there are some costs involved.
Yes.
So for any research, I think if you suggest something good way, as something new, it should be the cost factor also should be involved.
Yes.
Then it might be much more perfect.
I agree. Thank you.
One question about the quality of interaction in those three, you call them also channels or ways of communication. So does it matter if you, let's take the example of social media. Does it matter if you actively ask yourself something on social media and get a reply versus in a situation that you have maybe some kind of problem presenting in your mind, and then you go to social media webpages and read the discussions, because it's as consumer to consumer interaction, it's quite different type. So do you have any idea considering this question, or would it be something that you would like to considering in your next stage of research as well, to differentiate between levels of interaction in this.
You mean passive and active customer?
Passive and active. Do I ask questions and get replies, or do I just go somewhere and try to see the information?
That's one of the consideration. And artists show me about the impression about the customers.
Yeah, some companies are very active and some are just have a passive
Yeah.
SMS side.
That might also be quite important when the attitudes are informed. So assume that people who are quite active in these ways of communications might be more loyal as well.
Because we must characterize also the customer's interaction, because there are some disruptive customers, or the positive customers or negative customers. So we take them into consider about that.
Yeah, final one.
So next is the last presentation. Next one.
さっきの何をマシンなんだろうね。
周波数の問題なんで。
PDF なら
さっきのね同じ現象だね。
周波数の境界が出れば大丈夫。
出てこないですか。
そうそう出てこない。
やっぱ第4じゃダメなんだ。自分の先生のマシンだと大丈夫。
堀さんピンク見るじゃないですか。
disaster on 3.11 caused many logistic problems, and it prevented distribution of medicine for chronic disease and many tropical factors. So I think studying logistics is very useful. And so I studying logistics, and I learned supply chain management, SCM, is SCM includes logistics. So it is a principal study in business operations. So I want to study SCM and research SCM. So what is supply chain management? And SCM is the method to integrate supply and production and warehouse and store efficiency. And SCM aims to minimize the full system's cost while it satisfies the required service level by producing and distributing the quantity to the place and at the time properly. So, this is supply chain. Product and made and leads to the customer, and so this strains the cost to minimize its strain cost. So this is the point of the system. The most important matter is distributing the product to the customer just as much as they want, and just them, just though they want the product. So, but it is very difficult. So, SCM is very important. So, supply chain has mainly three flows: information flow, and material flow, and financial flow. Information flow is customer how many products they want, and company how many products they can make. That is such as one of the information flow. And material flow is the practical products or materials, distribution or logistics. And financial flow is flow of cash. But there are many strategies and programs in their flow. For example, information flow, group effect, and so on. The other programs and strategies is there is many other strategies and programs in supply chain management. So supply chain management is very broad concept and broad study. So I have to narrow the area of my study. So I introduce the case of supply chain. So this one is Dell computer. Dell computer sell computer built to order by customer. So before Dell computer, it was common of the sale via retail channel then. So and second, each computer is made from the parts of markets, not its own one, not made by their computers. So their computer doesn't have their warehouse or materials. So they are free from R&D and personal expenses. Personal expenses is to make their computer's parts. And they can turn the inventory 46 times a year. As ordinary company can only 13 times. So they can buy much more products than ordinary company. So first problem is them solve. And they could supply the customer with a proper goods at proper time. This is ordinary company can't. And they can avoid sold out. So, and they can save money. This is this means. And I introduced Ketsu and United Colors of Japan. This is apparel company. They dye clothes after knit. Ordinary company dye clothes before knit. So when it was yarn is spring. So they made plain clothes and after they are into color, or green one. So they can correspond to the various demand of color by customer, and they can respond to. They can avoid to sold out problem. So in my research, I want to find out the method to improve the supply chain for customers and companies. So these Dell Computer and Benetton, United Colors of Benetton are the best example. But it is difficult to do such scale. So I will try to do in smaller scale. So supply chain has a layer structure. So I start from a lower level, smaller scale. Layer is explained later. So methodology, I want to use patient-based estimation and control theory, but I didn't choose area, so I can't choose methodology. First, I have to narrow my research area. Which flow I choose, information, material, or financial, and which layer. Layer is company layer or division layer or each person layer or product layer and so on. And I choose which area, so material area or factory area or warehouse or retail. So, and I have to know how research has been performed. So,
Okay, so I have one question. You mentioned about the TOC, so but it's not related to financial one. It's focus as a result. It's affect some financial result. But anyway, it's only connected to scheduling. Yeah. So it's not directly not connected to finance. Anyway. So I want you to introduce what kind. Introduce our control concept into the these supply chain domain. So controlling concept is not so. I think not so applied in this area. Of course, contemporary control concept itself is a more complicated one. But anyway, maybe you can introduce a suitable concept of control into this area for analyzing supply chain management. Anyway, come back.
When it comes to control theory, who will control the supply chain?
That's fantastic.
I think a company.
Which company?
Which company?
In this approach.
For example,
For example, you were to example Benetton or their food control.
operator, CEO, to control their company.
Okay, maybe you should focus on more concrete